The Golden Stallion, the man of tomorrow, Savzu, the rated R radio star, here for your Patreon only Wednesday Q&A. And you know, this is kind of unique. I can maybe think of one other time, and I don't even remember if I did it then. I can only think of maybe one other time where I recorded the Q&A and then I said, you know what? I don't want that to go out. I think it was maybe one other time that I did that. But I'm here doing it again now. So if this is coming out later in the day, that's why. And because, you know, you just sometimes I don't know. Well, I know I have some podcasters, fellow podcasters that are patrons and that listen to my Patreon content. You got to have that moment where you listen back, or when you think about everything you just had to say, and you just go, not that. Well, this is one of those cases. Very rare, I assure you, that they do happen. But they do happen because personally, as a podcaster, I like to just one take Tony, just record it, get it done, put it out there. No serious edits or anything like that. Live to tape, as they say, or as they used to say, and just let it ride. That hotel room show. I'm glad everybody seems to be enjoying it as much as I did, and as much as I know Stephanie and Ellen did, who are just two of the best people. And wow, that was so much fun to do that. And yes, there will be. I did get questions already. People asking if there are going to be any other co-hosts that I have planned or in mind. There's like 2 or 3 ladies I could think of off the top of my head that maybe I'd have as full-on co-hosts. But you got to understand that while, I don't believe in intellectual property and, or any of that kind of horse shit. But when I say that I want to protect sovereign tech and that sovereign tech's mine, well, I take who I even let on my show, very seriously. And if I'm going to, when you get above 10,000 listeners, okay, that's when, and I've talked about this before, that's when a lot of advertisers, that's when a lot of people start saying, whoa, what do you got? What's happening here? Okay. So when I give somebody the title of co-host, I mean, it's not a joke. It's not just something cute, that's being done. Okay. I mean, and I've had issues with shows in the past, even ones that I've been a part of, where I thought that they were being way too lax, way too loose with who they were allowing onto their show, and I thought, and we're talking about shows that are thousands of times bigger as far as listener numbers, perhaps, than even Sovereign Tech. And I go, whoa, what do you do? like you're killing your own brand. Like this is crazy. So I like to be very selective. Okay. I've had some people offer, I've already had people email me and message me saying, hey, if you're interested in me being a co-host, I'd love to be a co-host. And look, I'm honored by that. Okay. I really appreciate that you're willing to be on board with something as really risque, rebellious, and over the top and ridiculous as Sovereign Tech can be. But yeah, I'm super particular, and really like I said, except for a couple of cases, like somebody that I'd be willing to give the title of co-host to. Okay, well, all right, let me make a correction here. Except for a couple of cases, the people that I would allow to be remote co-hosts, I mean, it is a very, very small amount of people. Okay. Now, the people that I already declared co-hosts, if they, for whatever reason, were remote, yes, I would still allow them, to be co-hosts remote. I mean, because they're that, in my opinion, they're that valuable, they're that wonderful, they're that great, and that brilliant. But yeah, and that's not, if you're, general, it's a pretty, bottom line, and this is no insult to anybody, bottom line, if you are remote, it's a pretty good, if we'd have to do it over Skype or Hangouts or whatever, it's pretty much a guarantee that I wouldn't have you as a co-host. Doesn't mean I wouldn't have you as a guest, but I wouldn't have you as a co-host, a regular co-host. That's not going to happen. I know a lot of people are asking about it, and it's just not going to be. It's too much of a pain in the ass. I mean, like Stephanie and I, we've done episodes of Sex and Science Hour with Andreas Antonopoulos, who I love Andreas, but like even then it's tough. Like, there's latency, lag, there's all these issues. It's very tough to make that happen. And you lose. There is an absolute magic when you have the people right in front of you. It doesn't have to be in a hotel room, though that's nice. But there's absolute magic when the people are in the studio. There's just there is something extra there. You can tell, you can feel it, not just as one of the actual hosts, not just somebody in the studio, but as a listener. I know it. I can tell, I can feel the difference in the flow of a show and everything else that's going on with the show when the people aren't actually in studio with you, or at the microphone with you at the same, however that ends up working out. So yeah, super particular on this, folks. But I'm really glad that everybody seems to just be loving it. I mean, like, very, here's a Patreon message from a patron. I'll leave them anonymous, but I'm so happy with the direction you've been taking the show that I had to up my pledge. I love the new co-hosts. Stephanie and Ellen are amazing. Stallion breaking in, you betcha. They most certainly are amazing. The Illumination Hour was brilliant, so being able to hear Ellen again regularly is also awesome. Yeah, I loved the Illumination Hour. I promoted that show as much as I could back when it was when Ellen was running it. If you want to find it, I think it was like 20 episodes or so. Especially her episode about Western civilization, and it's not exactly a positive one, was just brilliant. I mean, all the episodes are great, but yeah, you definitely want to check that out. And anyway, it went on. You put out so much amazing content. $6 just didn't seem like enough. You're worth at least as much as a Netflix account. Keep up the amazing work. Thank you. Like, really, thank you. Holy shit. That's a compliment, right? If you're worth as much, and I mean that, you're worth, because the person up to $10. So thank you. I will continue to keep that content, hopefully at such a high level. Also, people have really loved the new intros and everything, and I'm really glad that you're digging that. And really the direction that the show has been, things that we've been discussing, appropriate technology, putting technology in its place in our lives. Instead of falling into what Kevin Kelly of Wired would call, what technology wants, right? We're gonna do what technology wants us to do, not the other way around. No, it's going to be the other way around, Kevin Kelly. At least on Sovereign Tech, we're going to put this shit in its place. Okay, we'll use it and we'll allow it to, empower us and get us to more individual freedom. But we're going to keep it in check, and we're going to keep our humanity, or evolve our humanity a bit. And it doesn't have to evolve in so much of a transhuman direction, or, if people wanted to, they can, but of course, we're going to keep this shit in check. And, I'm enjoying the direction the show is taking too. It's really been, the time that Sovereign Tech has been around, the past 6 years, has been such a formative and experimental, evolutionary, really, time for tech, for the tech industry and the tech world, that I'm glad we were here to be talking about it and to be covering it and to be able to almost live commentate on this evolution. And I think we're finding out that a lot of the promise, a lot of the dreams that Silicon Valley was putting out there were absolutely electroplated, and they're not real. And they come with very heavy costs, and nothing is actually free. Nothing is free. I might talk about on this week's Sovereign Tech Prime episode, there are so many stories coming out now about people saying that, and granted it's coming from journalists themselves, but they're saying that, look, you got to understand that when content is free, and this is coming from like TechCrunch, people where their content is free, but they're laying out the commentary that when content is free, somehow, like there's a way that they have to make up for that. And we're not talking about cryptocurrency, we're not talking about CoinHive either. But like something has to, when it's free, there's a lot of avenues and strings attached and whatever else to make a story pay for itself because again, nothing's really free. Like even when they say, oh yeah, this story, we put our content out there for free. Most people that say that, or at least a lot of the big organizations or larger organizations that'll say that, they're full of shit. There's some kind of payment going on, whether it's, you seeing their ads or whatever, but then they have to somehow hook you. They can't really just tell you a story. They've got to hook you. They've got to play a little mental game with you to get you to their, and you know this. I'm not saying anything new here, but it's amazing that suddenly people are coming out saying, really you should be paying for your news. Like, in fact, if you're not paying for it, there's a problem. And they said that, in fact, this hits. So it was a story in TechCrunch, and at the end of it, they were pretty much saying it's remarkable that people will easily pay, $10 a month, whatever, for Netflix. Like, there's so many little things, so many different subscriptions that people will pay for. But as soon as it's like about news or something like that, or like if it's something, relative to a magazine or something along these lines, people won't pay a penny. But it's arguably far more important. This is classic diamonds and water economics shit, And it is interesting that people won't pay up more. And I'm glad, I'm honored that patron, and all the patrons that pay. You're bucking the system anyway, okay, that I'm describing. But I'm honored that you feel, okay, no, I'm getting like this much value out of what I put out there. Okay. And that means the world to me, because it's getting to the point where we need to be considering, hey, maybe we should be paying for our news. Maybe we should be paying for that kind of content and all this stuff. And I don't know, we could get into a much larger conversation around, sites using crypto miners and all, cryptocurrency miners and everything. Like there's, this might be a story we'll get into this week on Sovereign Tech Prime, where was it Salon that if you had an ad blocker running, they'd say, hey, either let us run a cryptocurrency miner and, or whatever, we don't want you to see our content. It's getting into weird times. That's for sure. But, I think that people paying for, for news, paying for whatever. I'm not saying pay for the New York Times, but if there were some kind of news organizations out there, I don't think there's anything wrong with wanting to pay the money, donating, whatever, because the ad model is just it's insane. So anyway, thank you for being a patron. I don't have like these crazy incentives. I really don't do a bunch of shit to just like, I do I can do clever titles sometimes, but I don't really do SEO. You can see my website. It's all as basic as can be. It's to get the point across, get the stuff out there. If the audience is going to grow any further from where it is right now, it's really totally reliant on listeners sharing the show. And I get reasons why people may not share the show. I totally understand that. You might be concerned that people would know that you're listening to somebody, where there's veritable sex, happening on air in a very real sense, with the intros and things like this. But, I got to be me. I have to put, and look, I'm not forcing anybody to do that shit. Everybody that's involved in making this show sexy, they want to do it. Do you understand? Like they're excited about it. Okay. So, there's no, I think that's another thing too. I don't want to spend a ton of time on, I'm already spending a ton of time on it. I think that's another thing too. Like, I get emails from people who say stuff like, well, aren't you worried that feminists are going to get pissed off at your show? That hashtag Me Too is going to have a problem with your intros and blah, blah. Look, it's just audio. Okay. But again, everybody involved are dear friends. I'm not hiring actresses. There's not, and the actresses in Me Too are right on. If they want to call out Tarantino, do it, Everybody involved with Sovereign Tech wants to do it. Like they're excited to do it. And I give every avenue to say, hey, yeah, look, if you don't like it, change it, whatever. When I hand out scripts for people, if there's something you don't want to be there, you just tell me, we change it in a heartbeat. You can ask them. I am so ridiculously respectful, because the real honor is that they are willing to do this stuff, with me, for me and all that. And it's just, and it all turns out fantastic. I'm not worried about a damn thing, Like this really kills me. In fact, getting those emails bothers the hell out of me, because it sort of shows just how out of touch so many people are. Look, it's not like there's a bunch of people out to get other people, right? There is a way. If you're respectful to women, guess what? Amazingly, like you can be friends. They're very kind. I'm being a little over the top, but I think most people are being over the top. This isn't some concerted effort to somehow, take down Hollywood or something. Not that I'd mind. Look, if Hollywood got taken down, great. Guess what? The last vestige of entertainment out there is going to be like podcasting, where there isn't some kind of scandal. Even then, I'm sure there's going to be plenty of scandals. I mean, just consider Cantwell, Kokesh, go down the list of libertarian luminaries, including one that somebody asked is like, hey, who are you warning about that was getting a clap for moving to New Hampshire and all this stuff? Well, I'll tell you who it was. It's Vin Armani. I think this is your next Kokesh. This is your next, I don't know that he'd be a Cantwell, but this is your next guy who, claims to be living by such and such and such. And you're going to find out, oh, no, this guy's got, this guy is, doesn't have skeletons in his past. He's got skeletons right now and in his future. You know what I mean? That's a metaphor. Okay. So yeah, but otherwise that means that all the people that have been going for years, that have been putting out regular quality content and everything, well, we just get to rise up, and we'll be the entertainment out there. I mean, yes, I know, people will just fill in the voids in Hollywood, and, everything will be out of Vancouver anyway, which it already is, but you get my point. I don't care. Let Hollywood fucking metaphorically, peacefully burn to the ground. It really doesn't matter to me, because, as I've said many a times, all the great movies have already been made. I mean, they've already been made. We're just bullshitting ourselves with a lot of, I mean, yeah, I'm excited to see some movies that are coming out, but by and large, we're bullshitting ourselves, like thinking that there's going to be some revolutionary film that comes out that didn't come out already 10 years ago or something. I really, really do. Unless you're doing things like, if you listen to the Relationship Rhombus show, unless you're doing shit like Professor Marston, but even then, that's not exactly like a creative work. I mean, it is, but, it's based on a true story. I'm sure there's, plenty of true stories that deserve a good movie that would be interesting. But, I mean, as far as like something completely original and all that, yeah, I mean, I think a lot of that's gone. Like, really the last big original film I remember seeing was maybe like Jupiter Ascending, that actually had any real weight and bearing. I mean, it's Hollywood's dead already. It really is. It's dead. Like, I mean, it's so much of what's coming out of it is meaningless anyway. And look, yeah, I love Star Wars. I love all this shit. Love Star Trek. Yada, 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 yada. Yep. Absolutely. But what we know of as the entertainment industry is just long, long dead. It's already gone. And a part of me couldn't be happier, because, whatever. I mean, I don't care, because it gives me the opportunity to make my content. I get to have fun now. I don't have to look to, I mean, that's the thing. Things like #MeToo and, Uma Thurman coming out against Tarantino and all this other stuff going on. I mean, this isn't what killed Hollywood. It's ripping the fucking Band-Aid off, and damn right, you go, girls, like, make it happen. Okay. Like the computer, the democratization of technology, the empowering of the individual, which you talk about all the time on Cybertech. That's what killed Hollywood. I don't need, do you understand? Like, and I've been thinking about this a lot recently. Okay. And I promise I'm going to get to your questions. We've got some doozies. I've been thinking about this a lot recently. I can make my own entertainment now. And in fact, for me, because it's what I want. Again, I'm not really taking requests. I mean, I like to reach out to you, the patrons, executive producers, and find out what you'd like. But at the end of the day, it's my idea that I'm forwarding to you. What would you be interested in this? And if I'm not passionate about it, it's not going to be worth doing anyway. Like you're not going to want it anyway, because you're going to hear that lack of passion in what I do. But that's my point, is that, and I'm not saying I'm making the greatest shit in the world. Okay. I'm really not making that claim here. I'm just saying that I can write my own stories. I can make my, and people want to come along for the ride. And I have great friends, beautiful friends that are just, all these ladies are just so wonderful. They want to do this stuff. It's awesome. Like, and I think maybe deep down they know it too. Like, oh, we can be the stars. We can make our own shit. Again, yeah, it's not whatever NPR is putting out. It's not, I don't know, something from Six Colors or whatever. It's not that, not claiming that it is, but it's fun. And people have a good time and they really enjoy it, and it's unique and it's special. And because the kind of shit that Sovereign Tech listeners are into, the ideology that we're behind, all these different things, Hollywood was never going to make that stuff anyway. So we might as well take our best crack at it, and I think we do a pretty good job. We have a lot of fun. We keep it kitschy, it's nice. So that's kind of what I've come to realize is that, well, fuck. Like, I don't have to waste my time hoping that something gets made that, checks off all my mental boxes of what I want out of entertainment. I'll just make it my goddamn self. And I can. And other people, they recognize the talent and they want to ride with it. And it's man, again, it's just so cool. Okay, I've spent 20 minutes talking about this. But look, the entertainment industry, it's not even, like, it doesn't even have to be about the money. When you have models like Patreon and other things, you can get all this self-funded. I mean, that's Patreon and computer software and all, that is literally changing fucking everything. Because now we don't have to rely on any part of the system if we don't want to. It is such an amazing time to be alive. As much as we also live in a sci-fi dystopia, no doubt about that, in my opinion, okay? But at the same time, it's an amazing time to be alive because we can just do, every single one of us, and I mean one of us, individuals, can do so much. Oh, it's exciting. All right, let's get into some of these questions here. Maybe we can get to 2 or 3 of them. So here's one that I wanted to. This is an update really from last week. So last week I got a question about what my favorite pair of Bluetooth headphones was, and it was the Plantronics Fit. You can go back to last week's Q&A, and you can find that. Let's see, this week we're being it's Valentine's Day. We're getting recorded on February 14th. I did get questions about Valentine's Day to talk about like the original history and everything of Valentine's Day, where it came from. That I'm going to make that a separate episode that'll probably come out Friday. And tomorrow you should be getting your Star Trek update that'll come out. So anyway, but last week I got about the Bluetooth headphones. So I mentioned the Plantronic Fit that you can get a link for those if you want a pair of those from last week's episode. I said how I had problems with it connecting properly to my ZenBook 3, my laptop, and also that it would skip when connected to my Kindle Oasis, and I was playing audiobooks from my Kindle Oasis. So I had a theory. I said, I wonder, what's the Bluetooth version of my headphones? And what's the Bluetooth version on my devices? And the two are radically opposed. The Plantronic Fit headphones are Bluetooth 3.0, and the ZenBook 3 and the Kindle Oasis are Bluetooth 4.1, and the latest spec is what, 4.2 or whatever? And I said, what? I wonder what happens if I connect a device that's 4.1, that's at least 4.1. And so I did that, bottom line, and all of the problems that I have with the Plantronic Fit went away. They weren't an issue anymore. And I tried it with a couple different devices that were Bluetooth 4.1, and it was fine. So now with my smartphone, the Plantronic Fit works great, and there's no issue at all. But then smartphones probably have like a wider band, or what's the term I'm looking for? Compatibility with different models of Bluetooth. I wouldn't think it'd be any different with the computer or the Oasis, but maybe there's something there. So anyway, in my searches for that, and this is what I want to tell you about, and there's a link in the show notes for it. I found in a miraculous little device that I should have known existed. And I don't know why I never looked for it before, but when I found it, I got one, like right away, partly because they only cost $15. What it is called the Griffin, iTrip. It's the Griffin iTrip. And what this is, it's just a little dongle that has a 1/8 jack on it, and it has some controls on it, okay, which you would normally find on a pair of Bluetooth headphones. And you can plug in any headphones you have that are wired right into that, and it turns it into a Bluetooth headset. It also has a microphone right on the Griffin iTrip device. So if your headphones don't normally come with a microphone built into them, now you have it, and it can just clip onto your shirt or clip onto wherever on you. This is really nice, and like I said, it's only like $15. I mean, you really can't go wrong. So this will convert any 1/8 jack signal, okay, any wired headphone or speaker or whatever signal, and it'll convert it to Bluetooth, and it's Bluetooth 4.1, and it works very well. In fact, also the other nice thing it does is it can connect to, unlike my Plantronics Fit headphones, it can connect to multiple devices at once, which is kind of cool. I think it can only do 2 at a time, but that means your smartphone, for most people, would probably be good, because it'd be your smartphone and your computer, and your laptop, whatever. And it just works really, really slick, really well. It has good range. Battery life's pretty good. A few, I think it was like 10 or some odd hours. Maybe it was even longer than that. But this is nice. And you know what else is nice, because I talked about this last week, is that now you could just carry around one pair of headphones, and you could carry around the little Griffin iTrip dongle. And that way you can just have one pair of headphones that you can plug into, if you need to plug it into a 1/8 jack or something, on your mobile setup or whatever, at some point, but then you need to switch to Bluetooth. Well, you just plug it into the Bluetooth dongle. Fantastic. I think that's a really, really neat solution. And so link in the show notes if you want to purchase one of those. And of course it goes through stuff.sexandsciencehour.com. So, okay, let's get on to some other, just wanted to give you that update and, let you know that problem is solved. If anybody else has a Kindle Oasis and they have a Bluetooth 3.0 set of headphones, I'd be curious if your experience is the same, but I can definitely tell you that using Bluetooth 4.1 headphones, the problem is instantaneously solved. Okay, funny thing, and I'm going to put the picture in the show notes for this episode, okay, for this Q&A. A bunch of people noticed. So this past week, we did the episode, of course, from the hotel room that was just phenomenal. What was that, episode 264 or 65 of Sovereign Tech? And the cover art for that episode was a picture of me, Ellen, and Stephanie on the couch, okay? And there's part of it where, the three of us are holding my podcast championship belt, and then there's ones where we're not and whatever. Anyway, so when you go to Patreon, okay, and if you go to posts, you go to the post tab on Patreon, it gives you the top 5 categories that you can look up as far as posts on Patreon. And I categorize the shit out of all my stuff. Okay. So like the first one is Sovereign Tech main episodes. Underneath that is Q&As, because the Q&As are the most popular, or the most, because you're getting one every week and you've been getting them for, a year or 2 years or so now. Anyway, so last week's Q&A was about Theodora, Empress Theodora, which I lost patrons after that. Okay. I'm telling you history, okay? But anyway, the funny thing is that the picture, so they show you little pictures from the latest episodes in these on the sidebar on the tab. And whereas Sovereign Tech main episode, the last picture was of, Stephanie, Ellen, and myself. And then underneath that was Q&A, which had a picture of a painting of Empress Theodora, kind of like laying back, like an artwork. Now, amazingly, Stephanie's head almost fits perfectly at the cutoff point of the body of Empress Theodora, and it looks like Stephanie's lounging back, her face, but on the body of Empress Theodora. Now, look, I'm not into any kind of, government ruling, or tyrannical ruling or anything like that, but boy, if Stephanie wouldn't make a great empress, I don't know who the hell would. But a couple people somebody pointed out on Twitter, another person pointed out on the community tab, which is a great place to ask questions, by the way, for Patreon, and interact with other patrons. Somebody else posted on the community tab and shared it, and I'll put it in the show notes for this episode, but it is hilarious when you see it. And you'd have to look at the picture in the show notes, because once this posts, that the picture is going to change on the Q&A tab. So anyway, There it is. But I thought it was funny how that worked out. They line up pretty perfectly. So, all right. Speaking of people that ask questions on there, here's one from February 1st that I said last week I would definitely get to. So I want to talk about it now, and I want to get into it. Here it is. So I have a question for the next Q&A. It is in two parts. Number one, what do you suspect the great filter is? Number two, do you believe humanity will surpass it? Okay, first off, what the hell's the great filter? So the great filter, I have talked about it briefly, sometimes not so briefly, on Sovereign Tech Prime in the past. It is a theoretical concept that basically tries to address like the Fermi paradox, which of course the Fermi paradox is addressing the Drake equation. Meaning that if, according to the Drake equation, there is the potential for millions of Earth-like planets, and thus on those planets, life should, and I'm not saying what I think, I'm saying what they think, or what most people think. Life should be kind of everywhere. Sapient life, perhaps. Life, complex life, not just simple, not just complex life isn't even a good enough term, because it's not just animal life, but sapient life, meaning it's knowledgeable, it's intelligent, it can act beyond instinct like we do as humans, or maybe dolphins do, things like this. And so, if there's so much of that, if there's so much possibility out there just in our galaxy, and really the Drake equation is mainly talking about our galaxy, not that we could really tell what was going on, in the Andromeda galaxy anyway. And yes, there could certainly be life or something. I mean, there is stuff in between the galaxies. There's a lot of gas, very hot gas that actually rips other galaxies apart. Rips them apart. There's stars likely in between galaxies. It's just that they're very dim, so we don't really see them. Bottom line being, in this galaxy, where is the life? How come we don't see any evidence of it? One theoretical framework as to why we don't see evidence of it is called the Great Filter, meaning that, yeah, okay, there's been sapient life out there, but once it gets to a certain stage of development, it ends up in self-destruction. It wipes itself out. Somehow, something happens. Okay. And the argument goes is that either humanity hasn't reached the Great Filter yet, meaning it's in our self-destruction is in our future, or we may be the first to have surpassed the Great Filter. Okay. Now, myself, I'll answer this in two ways, because I'll give you an answer to the actual questions, but also I'll give you what I actually think, because those are two very different things. First off, I don't think there's a Great Filter. Okay. I think that there is, and I think the math actually, the real math, not the Drake equation, because the Drake equation misses a lot of things. The real math takes into consideration that actually maybe planets like Earth are exceptionally rare. Like, as in, there might only be a few thousand, not millions, of just a few thousand. Hell, there could be only a handful of planets that have all the ingredients to allow for life to form, life in any way, not even just sapient life, but certainly that becomes another mathematical thing. Okay, so you have Earth-like planets. We don't even have a full understanding. Yeah, we have an abstract, a theory of evolution, which is sound and, right on. Okay. But we don't really know how, we don't have the exact makeup of, okay, how, or, understanding, all right, how did all this start? Kind of like we were talking about in this past Sovereign Tech Prime episode. How do you get consciousness from non-consciousness? Like, how did all this come together? Like, we don't exactly have the answers, and God's not an answer. Okay. So the chances that a planetoid, yeah, it can be just because it's in the Goldilocks zone really doesn't mean that it's guaranteed to harbor life, okay, or to start life, support life, whatever. It could be in the Goldilocks zone, and it could be, honestly, it could be a dead rock. It could be the moon. I mean, there's no guarantees here. The math is very fishy that a lot of these exoplanet researchers and whatever else put out. And look, they're bullshitting people 99% of the time anyway. Every time TRAPPIST-1, they'll talk about all these planets that they find, and they never tell you that most of the time they have to actually take them off of their exoplanets list because they find out that they were wrong. Actually, that's not potentially Earth-like. Okay, so there's a lot. The Drake equation is fucked up. It's a real problem. Okay. So my theory is there aren't a lot of planets to support life anyway, but also the mathematical possibility of sapient life even appearing on a planet that can harbor life is also like, I mean, the math behind that, the possibility, I mean, we're not talking billions to one. We're talking astronomical numbers, pun intended, to one. I mean, like it's got to be almost impossible for what it takes for some kind of sapient life to come into being. And we don't have a full understanding how sapient life came into being here. So, why, so is it the Great Filter? Have civilizations come and gone? Yeah, maybe some have, I'm not saying that that's impossible. Okay. But I'm saying, why aren't we detecting, and longtime listeners, I've said this before. Why aren't we detecting signs of sapient life, of advanced civilizations out there when there should be millions of, when quote unquote, there should be quote, millions of them? It's because there's not. We're not the first. I'm not saying we're not the first, but look, it's just really, really rare. And the bulk of what, SETI and whoever else is looking out there, I mean, we're looking in very small areas of space. And if life is as rare as I think the math truly bears out, and Earth-like planets are rare, are just as rare as as in maybe only a few thousand, okay, as I think the math truly bears out, and sure, we're not going to see them, but it's not because every species that gets advanced enough wipes itself out. Now, that said, okay, all right, wait, before I give you my answer, like if I believed in the paradigm of the Great Filter, before I do that, let's also consider, and I think Edward Snowden, when he was talking to Neil deGrasse Tyson, he made some kind of clever comment about this. I'm totally open to the fact that other species maybe have proper concern for their privacy and anonymity and things like that. And because of that, as a species, they've respected their own liberties, by their own sapient existence. And maybe they've done a good job of making sure that you can't tell that they're out there. Maybe they had reasons for that. I'm open to that possibility too. Not as like basic and clever as Edward Snowden made it. It's like, oh, maybe they're encrypting things. Yeah, I mean, it's encrypting, but I'm open to that kind of, answer too, as to why that is, as to why we don't see life out there. Again, that's another alternative to something like the Great Filter, to claiming that the Great Filter is the thing. But anyway, all right. So if I was going to answer the question, what do I suspect the Great Filter is? I think it's things like CRISPR. I think it's things like, genetic manipulation of a species, of a sapient species. I think that's what causes it. And one of the reasons that you'd want to get into really heavy duty, not just to cure cancer or whatever medical condition exists out in the galaxy. Okay. I think one of the reasons that you would get into genetic engineering or genetic manipulation, and this is not a new idea and it's not my idea, but that to become a multi-planet species, you might want to change your DNA at a very fundamental level as a species. For example, not even, a sapient species, but, decades ago, Carl Sagan would talk about, okay, well, if we're going to colonize Mars, if we're going to become a multi-planet species, if we're going to become interstellar, if we're going to colonize Mars, what we should do is we should make the plants black instead of green. So we'll genetically engineer them to be black. That way they actually collect, they do a better job of collecting sunlight and things like this. And now I'm not saying that anybody's really planning on doing that, but my point being is that it's long been considered, okay, by astrophysicists, by people interested overall in getting to outer space and studying outer space and all that, that we may have to fundamentally change the genome, the makeup of whatever we send out into space, and that could include us. And if there is a Great Filter, if I believe that paradigm was valid, okay, that framework was valid of the Great Filter, I would say that what ends up wiping species out is that when they do decide to go multiplanetary, they go through genetic manipulation, and that genetic manipulation creates either like some kind of medical catastrophe that wipes out the species, or you end up with, like a eugenic situation where, another species, I don't know, superior, right? It's like the classic Khan Noonien Singh stuff from Star Trek. Superior ambition or superior ability breeds superior ambition, and there ends up being like a eugenics wars of sorts that goes down. So that's what I would say the great filter is probably like altering the species and going so far as to create multiple types of, like in the case of humans, and I've played audio, maybe it was a couple of years ago, I played a TED Talk where a guy talked about this, is that we're going to, or his theory is that we are absolutely, and it had kind of been done, but that we were going to create completely different types of human beings. Not saying that they have 4 arms or whatever, but that their DNA would have all new types of DNA that are not part of the human condition or, human biology at this time. And we would do this for purposes of, actually, in his mind, it was to save the species because it would keep those humans from getting infected by things done by another type of human. But in actuality, I could see where it would actually create the opposite effect, that doing that, fundamentally altering the DNA of an entire group of humans, or, creating a new type of humans and all that, would result in potentially medical catastrophe or some kind of civil, biological civil war. So that's my take. If I were to guess what the great filter is, I think that's what it is, because I think that's something that is being very, very much considered as we are getting closer and closer to becoming a genuine interstellar species. Okay, which I think I say this all the time, but really I think we're meant to be a multi-planet species. That's going to happen. So, and I don't think we're going to wipe ourselves out. As dumb as so many of us are, and believe me, I really do think the bulk of humanity is just fucking stupid. Okay, we're not going to wipe ourselves out, because there's certain biological universals that we have, I think that keep that sort of thing from happening, even as screwed up as civilization is today. So, all right, let's move on to another question. And this one's kind of fun. And I'd never really heard this before, quite frankly, but I was so stunned. And this is coming from Jim Jesus, of course, of the Lulberts. That's a podcast out there. That's their word. You want to check them out. In fact, they recently had MK Lords on. Jim had MK Lords on. You're going to give that stuff a listen. So... and root for MK Lords. All right. Vote for MK Lords. Anyway, he asked this question. He said, I have a question. What do you think about the theory that's been making the rounds in some egoist groups on the internet that Max Stirner wasn't a real person, but a creation of Frederick Engels? Some of the evidence is that there's no record of him existing outside of his works, and references from Marx and Engels. Meaning that, so Frederick Engels, of course, is the guy that worked with Karl Marx, and, they wrote so many different, these are the guys that came up with a lot of the framework of modern or relatively modern communism. Okay. So Engels and Marx, most people know who that is. And they did, and I've talked about this in past Patreon episodes where, like, there's a lot of communists who say Max Stirner was actually a communist. And, my instantaneous answer for that is, well, then why did Engels and Marx spend so much time criticizing Stirner and thinking that they took him to task, which they didn't. Stirner still owns, all philosophers and all philosophies. I mean, he just crushes them, like the spooks that they are. But anyway, so reading on, there's no photographs or sketches of him until after his death. His ex-wife refused, Stallion, breaking in for a second. That's somewhat true, because the main picture, the drawing that most people know of Max Stirner, was actually drawn by Engels. So, going on, there's no photograph, his ex-wife refused to talk about him to people interested in his work. Now, he does have a tombstone, but it says his nickname rather than his real name, and that was even paid for by Engels, because Engels, Stallion breaking in, Engels was a very wealthy man, ironically, as a communist. I don't believe it personally, but I think it's fun when I see people dig for answers to this. Per usual, don't care if you say who asked. Hail Satan. Yes, hail Satan, Jim. And of course, do Lulberts, LOL Berts, BERTS. Check them out. Okay, so see if you're a patron. I'll give you the hookup. Let's talk about this, because woo boy. So all right, first thing to understand. Max Stirner, yes, that's not his real name. His real name is Johann Caspar Schmidt. He was born in October of 1806, and he lived to be exactly 50, or, well, not exact, I guess 49, because I think it was like June of 1856 that he died. Engels is, very much the younger man, but lived longer. Engels was born in 1820, ended up dying in 1895. Both German philosophers. And Engels, now, when I've talked about Stirner, yes, Engels comes off as one of the people who has independently written and talked about Max Stirner. Okay, so that's why he's an important figure to consider. Whenever you're studying Max Stirner, it's important to see what Engels said about him, because he had so much to say. And look, all right, I'm just gonna hit this right out. Well, first thing, somebody said, and this was funny, when theorizing that Stirner didn't actually exist and that really it was all Engels, somebody said, well, the guy's middle name is Casper, like Casper the Ghost. Now, I think the person was, or I'm sure the person was just joking, because Casper, the friendly ghost or the spook, wasn't created until the 1930s. So, that wasn't a thing. But I thought that was pretty funny. It's like mind blown, but in jest, of course. So first thing to understand is that the basis of this theory really falls on the idea that, most of what we know of Max Stirner outside of Stirner's own work, and, we kind of know a lot. Like, we know that he was a teacher, kind of with the young Hegelians, he did all this kind of stuff. And, his book, The Ex-Wife, is, The Ego in Its Own, or The Unique in Its Property, whatever title you want to run with, was dedicated to her. But anyway, a lot of this really relies upon the theory, or the idea, that everything you know of Stirner outside of his own work is by Frederick Engels. That's not true. So that, there's problem number one. That part is absolutely not true. There are contemporaries, for example, John Henry Mackey, who wrote an entire biography on an entire history on Max Stirner, his life and his work, which was published in 1897. Okay, there's others. He's not. There are other philosophers who commented on Stirner's work, and Engels is not the only person that has written about, or that was a contemporary or anything like that, of Max Stirner. Okay, so putting this to bed right now, Max Stirner was a real person. It was not Engels. That said, you do have the problem when you get, even into the 19th century, okay, which is, in the grand scheme, fairly recent. You do have the problem of what's often called the George Washington test. And the George Washington test is, how do you prove that somebody existed in history? And George Washington himself is actually very difficult to prove that he existed in history. You think, what? This is a guy who, so foundational to America, such a big deal. There's entire conspiracy theories about George Washington, that actually Washington is Adam Weishaupt, of the Bavarian Illuminati, the guy that started the actual Illuminati. Whether there's still an Illuminati today, that's a completely different story. But, back, a couple hundred years ago, sure, there absolutely was. That's accepted fact. Okay. But a lot of people say that Washington, or at least maybe not his whole life, but maybe at one point was replaced by Adam Weishaupt. This idea, okay, so first off, it's tough to prove that anybody existed in history. Just like Jesus, it's very tough to prove that Jesus existed. You have more or less one or two independent accounts, and the second one is even questionable. You have Flavius Josephus, who was kind of a contemporary, arguably could have been a student of John the Baptist, who he wrote about Jesus. He has one little line in his, history or Antiquities of the Jews, which is his classic work, within his works, where he mentions Jesus. So, that's all you've got outside of the New Testament itself, as far as proving that there was a Jesus. Some people want to say that there are parts of the Talmud that are referencing Jesus, but that is speculation. I'm not saying that it might not be. I'm saying that it's speculation. So it can be very tough to, to prove that a lot of these historical figures exist. And that's why you have the George Washington test, which, again, George Washington himself fails. So, I don't believe that Max Stirner is Engels, but I do want to say that throughout history, you do, this kind of thing comes up a few times. There is the argument that there was actually no Socrates. It was just Plato. It was a creation of Plato. There is the idea, and this is one I actually subscribe to. I believe this wholeheartedly, that there was no, or at least the writings of Shakespeare, of William Shakespeare, are not by a guy named William Shakespeare. Those writings are done by none other than Sir Francis Bacon. Okay, Scientific Method, New Atlantis, all that. I firmly believe that. Okay, these kind of claims are not unheard of. And sometimes they might be absolutely legitimate. Okay, that one person is just they've created a pseudonym that maybe took on a very real life of its own. It's a possibility. There's a possibility that, I don't think so. Just because of the way that the other writers that have written about Stirner, the way that they write about him and everything, I really do believe that they encountered Stirner, that it wasn't just bullshit, or in some form or fashion. But sure, it's not impossible that Frederick Engels created Max Stirner. And why would he do that? Well, as an intellectual foil, somebody that himself and Karl Marx could, work off of at a very, at a very young age. And or not at a young age, but or early on into their exploration of their own ideology and philosophies. And it's not that alone isn't a crazy idea, right? Because I would argue, in fact, I haven't played this. A while ago, I wanted to play this. Tom Woods had a guy on his show who was talking about all these other, anarchist thought leaders kind of before anarcho-capitalism and everything. And the amazing thing is that they get to a point where they talk about Max Stirner. Now, Tom Woods more or less just says Stirner's crazy. But the guy who wrote the book about all these anarchists, who did all the studying about these anarchists, said, yeah, but really Max Stirner is the logical conclusion of individualism. In the guy's opinion, in the commentator's opinion, but it's so impractical, nobody could live that way, so nobody will. But they were pretty much admitting that Stirner's right, and that when you take individualism, not even like capitalism and all this other stuff, but when you take those ideas to their extreme ends and logical conclusions, you end up with egoism. You end up with Stirner's works. They admitted it. It was amazing. I don't think they realized what they did. Because they pretty much, Tom Woods more or less gave platform and said that, oh, Stirner's right. He didn't say that, but it was, there was no argument against it. The guy that he had on, and Tom Woods didn't say anything in response. The guy he had on said, it's yeah, this is where it ends. This is the logical conclusion of individualism is egoism. So sure, it makes sense that, the communist forefathers would want to create a character that shows the extreme ends of where individualism takes you. So it's not that crazy of an idea that Engels would do that. And it'd be ironic, that in trying to schlep bullshit to the world, you end up creating the truth. Engels is trying to convince all his people, of this communist horseshit, and and look, I know I have communists in my listenership, but you know how I feel about this stuff, okay? But in so doing, you actually create for lack of a better term, the purest philosophy of them all, where you get rid of all the spooks, you get rid of all the phantasms, okay? You get rid of all the bullshit, and you're left with Stirner. You're left with egoism. That would be such an irony. And it'd almost be fun if it were true. I could appreciate that if that were a fact, but I don't think it's true. Now, a funny thing is that, yeah, there is a degree of mystery to Stirner's life in a lot of ways. I mean, I didn't even get into the milk shop. I mean, there's so many things that really there's a few things that I think prove Stirner was real and existed. There's a part of me that always wondered if Stirner was like a Saint Germain or one of these like ascended master type characters, that maybe like Madame Blavatsky would talk about, something along those lines, like, because, the argument would be that, Francis Bacon was actually an ascended master and whatever else, all these people that reach these incredible heights of, I don't know, not knowledge, but philosophy wouldn't even be the right term either. But whatever, like a part of me has often, dallianced the idea that Stirner was, some like almost like the wandering Jew, some immortal just going around that pissed off Christ 2,000 years previous, right? He's a Flying Dutchman of ideology. I've toyed with the idea, I don't think that there are people out there that are immortal. This isn't Requiem for Methuselah from the original series, and, Stirner's not Flint. Okay. But that kind of notion, I think that's that theory is way more fun to play with. Because you'd almost have to think that, especially at that time, in the 19th century, mid 19th century, to come up with the shit that Stirner came up with, like that, you'd almost think you'd have to live 1,000 lives to kind of reach that conclusion at that time, especially. But really, it was a time that was, just rife with a lot of wild ideas that I think have been, just as Stirner was kind of forgotten for a while, and he really was. I mean, I know the individualist anarchists, Benjamin Tucker and the like, tried to keep what he had to say alive, and I appreciate that. But, Stirner is, more so than anybody, any ANCAP philosopher, it doesn't matter which one, any libertarian philosopher, minus maybe Ayn Rand, like Stirner he is in the philosophy books. He gets taught in college, or at least he's mentioned, I mean, Stirner's work is absolutely academic. It's given far more regard and respect than anything done by Ayn Rand. Certainly, I mean, no respect is given to, and maybe rightfully so, no respect, well, at least with this guy is rightfully so, no respect is given to Hoppe, and he doesn't deserve any. Rothbard, yeah, I mean, he doesn't get any real respect either. I don't feel as strongly against him as I do Hoppe, but, I mean, Stirner's there. But the time that he was there, I mean, allowed for a lot of these wild ideas that, like I said, otherwise, mainly, even though they're still maybe in academic textbooks or something, have been, largely forgotten. Herbert Spencer. There's a guy that, well, I don't know how forgotten he exactly is. Herbert Spencer's a boy. That's somebody that needs to get re-explored and talked about a whole hell of a lot more than he is in a lot of circles. The names that get talked about when I go to like Liberty events and everything, the names that get listed off, I so often, me personally, I think are just absolutely the wrong names. I mean, they really are. Like, Spencer's not getting explored, I think, and I get it. He's a socialist, but that doesn't mean there isn't some gold in them there hills. Okay. Charles Fourier doesn't get discussed. There's a laundry list of guys from like the 19th century that had some really brilliant ideas that people just kind of tossed away, and said, forget it. Amazingly, you get like, your Kropotkins and others, like, Kropotkin gets respected pretty well, even within more libertarian circles, which I'm certainly glad for that. I mean, gets somewhat respected until somebody actually looks into his history, and then they have a brain aneurysm because they can't handle somebody saying something negative about capitalism, even when, you really should have an open mind and be open to other ideas. And just because it has an ism that you don't like, well, whatever. I mean, it just shows how you're not going to grow as a human being anyway. So, which is, I don't know how I have, the amount of patrons that I do, because I think at some point I must offend everybody. But anyway, Yeah, so no, or bottom line, okay, a lot of these guys are not explored enough. Just because they've been ignored does not mean that they're a fictional creation of a philosopher or ideologue that is more well known. Meaning, like, just because nobody didn't wrote about Stirner as much or talked about Stirner as much or hung out with Stirner as much as they did Engels doesn't mean that Engels created Stirner. So yeah, I don't believe that, but. Yeah, that's really all I have to say about it. If you haven't read Stirner's works yet, I totally recommend that you do. We actually have more entries from the Sovereign Tech First University coming out this month, which means there's going to be more egoism. And of course, egoism comes from, I'm not saying Stirner necessarily invented egoism. I mean, I think its strains existed before Stirner, but certainly Stirner popularized it and put it into a singular tome. That really what I think happened there, not that Stirner didn't exist, but just that I think a lot of people saw that this was the end of their jobs, and so they wanted to ignore it and they wanted to toss it aside. They couldn't completely toss it aside because he was talked about by other philosophers of his day and written about by other major philosophers of his day, and so they couldn't completely ignore him. Otherwise, I mean, because if it wasn't for that, if it wasn't for the fact that more than Engels did write about him, we probably would, like so many books that have been lost to time, The Ego in its own probably would have been lost to time because not that it would have been like suppression, just that nobody would want to talk about it. They'd be like, oh, well, fuck no. Because if people start buying into egoism, they're not going to need any of us. They're not going to need any kind of hierarchy. They're not going to need any academic. They're not going to, or whatever. So yeah, I think that's the reality of the situation there as far as like why Stirner may be in any way mysterious, or there may be, like, why don't we know more, blah, blah, blah. Well, there it is. And which, also lends to another problem is that you get rampant misinterpretation, I think, of what Stirner had to say. Like with Karl Marx, yeah, you get misinterpretation of Karl Marx, from Russia itself, right? Or, the history of the USSR and whatever else. You get plenty of people that completely misconstrue whatever Marx had to say because maybe your understanding of Marx is based upon a critic of Marx, and you don't know what he really said about things. I've applauded some people, even though I may not be their biggest fans, like maybe Jeffrey Tucker, who has tried to bring actual light to, what Marx really said, instead of just what Ayn Rand says Marx said, or what Hoppe says Marx said, or whatever. I'm glad for that, but yeah, that's the thing. Just look into these characters, okay? Read this stuff for yourself, because most people, when you're listening to a commentator, even from me, there could be misrepresentation of what they actually meant. There's misinterpretation and whatever else. So, but that doesn't mean that they were fictional or created by another person once again. Okay, that's it for this week. We'll wrap this baby up. Interesting. I mean, like really the whole Engels is Marx thing, or Engels is Stirner. Like, I mean, that really is pretty wild. That is a wild claim. And again, throughout history, have there been other cases like that? Yes. And some of them I very much buy into. Like I said, I firmly believe that Francis Bacon was actually Shakespeare, or the works credited to Shakespeare were written by Francis Bacon. It fits like a glove. But anyway, there's been other situations like this. Alan Smithy, right? Is that actually David Lynch? No, I'm kidding. That's a joke. That's a Dune joke. All right, that's it. Got a lot of other stuff coming out over the next couple weeks in February, and just really excited for everything going on with Sovereign Tech, and that'll wrap it up. So got a little tech in here for you, a little science in here for you, and then some ethics. I mean, we ran a pretty good gamut, and I even talked a little bit about Sovereign Tech and what's coming for that. And Hollywood is dead. Good. I'll see you on the other side. Woo!